morning, esteemed and honorable comrades, ladies and gentlemen. Global security, for which members of the World Peace Council strive for, can only develop qualitatively in peace if it is based on voluntary cooperation between nations and peoples. Democracy, peace, and security can thus only flourish in an international scale under the international rule of law, which guarantees national freedom and human rights. The basis of global security is freedom. It is on this basis that the World Peace Council stood firm in solidarity with the peoples of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia against NATO bombings 25 years ago. NATO dropped bombs and supported armed insurgents in Yugoslavia whilst insisting that its motives were purely humanitarian. NATO bypassed the United Nations Security Council to illegally attack Yugoslavia. Among the targets bombed were the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, at which 3 Chinese state media journalists were killed and at least 20 other individuals injured. It also attacked a radio station which NATO alleged operated as a propaganda tool for the government of President Milosevic. These acts of violence and terrorism were labeled as war crimes by Amnesty International. NATO launched its campaign without United Nations approval, stating that it was a so-called human intervention. The United Nations Charter prohibits the use of force except in the case of a decision by the Security Council under Chapter 7 or self-defense against an armed attack, neither of which were present in the case of Yugoslavia. Global peace and security seeks to replace global aggression by an ethos in which peace, security, and public interest take precedence over that of the military-industrial complex that thrives on war. Global aggression is a grave danger to the freedom of all nations and world peace. A war of aggression is a crime against international peace. Aggression thus gives rise to international responsibility. In terms of the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3314 on the international law of aggression, aggression is defined as the use of armed force by a state or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations as set out in its definition on aggression. The fundamental purpose of the United Nations is to ensure international peace and security and take effective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace. Global security has become a major factor in world affairs. Zionist Israel's occupation of Palestine persists, aided and abetted by the United States of America because it advances America's geopolitical military interests in the Middle East. The illegal land, home, and property seizures that spanned 531 Palestinian villages from 1947 to 1948 should remind us that the war in Palestine did not start on October the 7th, 2023 in Gaza, an open-air prison. Palestine has been occupied for more than 70 years. The Israeli army's brutal and forcible displacement of Palestinians, the indiscriminate destruction of hospitals, schools, places of religious worship, and museums, the total blockade leaving more than 2 million civilians without food, water, medicine, electricity, fuel, and other necessities are inhuman acts of genocide. The aggression by Israel on Palestine has become one of the most horrific humanitarian tragedies and acts of genocide in recent history. The South African Peace Initiative pledges solidarity with the people of Palestine and supports their long-standing just struggle for freedom and the realization of their legitimate and legal national rights based on the universal principles of the United Nations Security Council. We urge an urgent ceasefire and the immediate end of hostilities and adherence to the measures prescribed by the International Court of Justice. We further call for the negotiations under the auspices of the United Nations to be renewed on the principle of the existence of two independent states and the ending of the occupation of Palestine in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the United Nations. Those who have remained silent throughout Israel's mass murder of Palestinians must remain silent when Palestinians defend themselves. America, in turn, has threatened South Africa with economic and political sanctions for having stood up for the people of Palestine's right to liberty, peace, freedom, and justice at the International Court of Justice. South Africa is prepared to pay the price for standing on the side of righteousness and justice. The title of this conference, namely, Not to Forget, the marking of 25 years since the beginning of NATO aggression against Serbia and Montenegro, is very apt. The criminal bombings by NATO and the death and suffering it caused should never ever be forgotten. In conclusion, we should always remember that no fist is big enough to hide the sky. An injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And no one is free until we are all free. I thank you.